The Temple Institute presents Parashat Shavua, the weekly Torah teaching by Rabbi Richman.
Shalom. This week we are beginning a new book of the Torah, the book of Exodus, Sefer Shemot, Parashat Shemot. After the reunion of Yosef and his father and brothers, a few good years that they lived together, the Jewish people descends into the darkness of the Egyptian exile. In the first few verses of this week's Parsha, we confront the harsh and stark new reality, a new situation in Egypt. And in this week's Parsha, we are first introduced to the Redeemer, the lawgiver of Israel, Moshe himself. Moses, a man who had the most intimate relationship with Hashem of any human being. A person who so desired closeness with Hashem and so perfected himself that he actually spoke with God face to face. And our sages tell us here and there a little bit about his upbringing, his very seemingly strange, enigmatic background, how he was raised in no other place than the house of Pharaoh itself, and how when he came of age he came out and saw the burden and the abuse of his brethren, and he sought to help them. Our sages tell us that in every generation there is potentially a Moshe, and his whole essence and nature is so inexorably bound up with that of his people. Moshe, as we're going to learn, one thing about him that was characteristic, one thing that was really a reflection of his essence, is that he was willing to forego even his own life, even his share in the coming world, but even his own life altogether for his people. There's never been a leader as selfless and as dedicated to his people as Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses our master. And indeed, he is like the paradigm. He is the very embodiment of the concept of what a leader should be. So pure and selfless in his motivation to seek the betterment of his people. Therefore, it seems kind of strange to us when he has his initial encounter with Hashem, that in the beginning of chapter 4 of this week's Torah portion, Moses responded and said, "But they will not believe me, and they will not heed my voice, for they will say, Hashem did not appear to you." He expresses some doubt, some suspicion even, that the children of Israel are going to reject his message. And so we read, Hashem said to him, "What is that in your hand?" And he said, "A staff." He said, "Cast it on the ground." And he cast it on the ground, and it became a snake. Moses fled from it. Hashem said to Moshe, "Stretch out your hand and grasp its tail." He stretched out his hand and grasped it tightly, and it became a staff in his palm. "So that they shall believe that Hashem, the God of their forefathers, appeared to you, the God of Abraham, the God of Yitzchak, and the God of Jacob." And then Hashem said further to him, "Bring your hand to your bosom." And he brought his hand to his bosom. Then he withdrew it, and beheld his hand was leprous like snow. Hashem said, "Return your hand." And he returned his hand to his bosom. Then he removed it, and behold, it reverted to be like his flesh. "It shall be," Hashem said, "that if they do not believe you and do not heed the voice of the first sign, they will believe the voice of the latter sign." And then he even went and gave him a third sign, which he didn't need. Later on, we will read that when indeed Moshe and Aaron gathered all the elders of the children of Israel, Moshe performed the signs in the sight of the people, and the people indeed believed, and they heard that Hashem had remembered the children of Israel and saw their affliction, and they bowed their heads and prostrated themselves. Like so many other aspects of Parashat Shemot and Sefer Shemot, they have their beginnings in Sefer Breshit, specifically in the last Parsha, last week's Torah portion, Parashat Vayechi. And one of the most dramatic moments in last week's Parsha, one of the most memorable verses in Parashat Vayechi was the very beginning of chapter 49. Then Jacob called for his sons and said, "Assemble yourselves, and I will tell you what will befall you in the end of days. Gather yourselves and listen, O sons of Jacob, and listen to Israel your father." And this is something that we've discussed so many times. Everybody discusses it. It's one of the most profound mysteries of the Torah, how obviously Yaakov, who gathered his children, was about to reveal to them, exactly as he said, what's going to happen to you in the end of days. But in the end, he never does. And there's so much that's been said about this. But there's one thing that we've never said, a very unusual midrash. Midrash tells us that when Yaakov lay on his deathbed, all his children gathered around him, he told them something. And the midrash inserts this as a comment on this very verse, Genesis 49 and verse 1. The midrash says that Yaakov told his children, you know what? All this is going to change. It's going to go down this way. This whole situation here in Egypt is going to get very ugly. And you're going to be in servitude. But there's going to be a redemption. And I want you to know, Yaakov told his children, if someone comes along and says, okay, I'm the messenger of the redemption, now it's the redemption, don't believe him. Only believe him if he does the following. If he does these signs, if he takes a staff and turns it into a snake, and if he puts his hand into his chest and pulls it out and it's white like snow and then puts it back again, that's the man. Then you can believe him. And this tradition was passed down, so that when Moshe came along, this is why they believed him. And indeed, in our Torah portion, back in Shemot, we read at the very end of chapter 4, and he performed the signs in the sight of the people. Our sages tell us, yes, those very signs which had been foretold by Yaakov himself as part of that tradition about what will befall you in the end of days. Well, this is a very remarkable and new thought, that these signs were actually foretold, and that Yaakov actually knew that this would happen, and that he actually prepared his children, beware of imposters. If anybody comes along and tells you, well, the redemption is going down right now, don't listen to them unless that man knows the secret code, which is these signs. Well, this is all amazing. And I think it's specifically amazing when we think about the nature of what those signs were. This is something that's very hard to get our minds around. What were those signs really all about? What is the common denominator of those signs? Why those particular acts? What do they symbolize? This staff that turned into a snake and the leper's hand that turned back to regular flesh. Well, actually, there is no mystery there according to Torah tradition. Rashi cites, in the name of our sages, a very clear tradition that the signal here was that Moses himself, the great lover of Israel, the deliverer, and the one about whom we said was willing to give his life for his people, as he will prove time and time again. Well, Moshe doubted that Israel would believe him. And Moshe had this suspicion. Well, what if they're not going to believe me? Just as he himself articulated. And our sages say that he was reprimanded by God because he suspected that they would not believe him. He actually, in point of fact, spoke Lashon Hara. He spoke ill of his people. That is symbolized by the snake. And also, the leprosy is actually a punishment well known, as we will learn later in the case of Miriam. This is also a punishment for speaking Lashon Hara. So what I find remarkable here is that these very signs that it turns out, at least according to one midrash, were foretold by Yaakov as being the signs that will indicate that the true redemption is at hand. These very signs are themselves a symptom of the leader suspecting that Israel will not believe. And indeed, as the verse tells us, they didn't need the third sign. Israel immediately believed in these signs. So this is somewhat of a conundrum, because the signs that Hashem gave over, as it were, to Moshe in order to prove himself to the people of Israel had been foretold by Yaakov and had been safeguarded as a tradition. Yet these signs were only necessary, according to our sages, because Hashem was actually reprimanding Moshe for his lack of trust in Israel. So in a way, it's kind of like, which came first? Now, a lot of people wonder, what about today? A lot of people are waiting for the complete redemption, and they wonder, should we wait here? Should we wait there? And they're waiting for some kind of sign. Something really interesting that's being emphasized here is how important it is for the leader of Israel to be so inexorably bound up with them, to be of the same head, to be so close to them as to trust them, as to know that inherently, collectively, in their soul of souls, in their essence, they haven't forgotten. They haven't lost sight. They have the belief, just as the people of Israel did, just as the people of Israel showed Moshe immediately that they believed him, how the signs really weren't necessary. Maybe what Yaakov really foresaw is that the relationship between the leader who is coming to redeem Israel, each in his own way, each in his own time, the relationship between the leader and the people has to be such that in his mind, in the leader's mind, the people are beyond suspicion, that he has to know that they are ready, that their level of purity is such that they haven't lost the faith, that he needn't suspect that he has to prove it to them, because they are ready, they are waiting. This was actually the lesson that Hashem sought to teach Moshe, that they would not need to be convinced. Yaakov saw this ahead of time, that it would be necessary for Moshe to learn that they were going to be receptive, that he needn't be concerned that they would not accept his message. And perhaps in every generation, as Yaakov gathered his children to tell them, to share with them what the future would hold, perhaps according to this interpretation, he did let something out of the bag, and he did indicate to them the pattern that needs to be avoided towards the complete and final redemption. That the people of Israel truly, in their heart of hearts, know the sign. They know the moment is coming. They are beyond reproach and must merit to leadership, as Moshe learned, that can appreciate that deep wellspring within their very essence, that nothing needs to be proven, that they know very well that Hashem is guiding them and will bring about the moment of their redemption.
The Temple Institute's weekly Torah teaching is produced and copyrighted by the Temple Institute. These teachings are available on universaltorah.com in audio and video format. To learn more about the Temple Institute, please visit templeinstitute.org.